Well, thank you so much, Keith. We love the next right thing for this Wednesday edition of Morning Joy. And we're really talking about taking a breath and really listening, the art of listening to one another. It's very important because, we're mid year, Adam, and oftentimes people just start to get into their, massive routines of what they're doing in life, and they're moving really along and just going as fast as they can, and the year is flying by, and there can be this situation happening with folks, even in families, in the workplace, in the parish community, where people are just not bothered. They're not even bothering to listen to each other. They're just moving. They're just saying and doing and speaking. And so we really want to just take this time, especially this morning, and just everybody just kind of absorb this and see if it can help you in your daily life. What do you say, Adam?
Well, listening is kind of a central, obviously a central part of being a therapist, of doing therapy, even in the life coaching world, any type of counseling, and of course, a lot of other areas in life. It actually has a really interesting history. So obviously, on a basic level, we listen to communicate, right? So we're motivated in some way to receive some information from a person. And within the world of like counseling and therapy, the human interaction is much more intentional. And a lot of what we think of when we think of the art of listening actually comes from a guy named Carl Rogers. He was a psychologist back in the 50s. He was working in the 40s, but he really became well known in the 50s, really starting in 47. And he was the guy who talked about something called unconditional positive regard, which some people may have heard from their Psych 101 class, or if they've done, more advanced stuff. And he was big on listening. And his thing on listening was that it was central to things. Like, instead of being the therapist who says, okay, you need to think this way, and you need to stop doing that and do this over here, and I'm going to tell you how to run your life. He was very much the opposite. And he really wanted to convey to the person that he was genuinely paying attention to what the person was saying. Not only what they were saying, but the feelings behind what they were saying. The self that was partly revealed in what they were saying. Like we speak differently with our best friend, in confidence than we do with somebody on a bus, right? And so he wanted the person to feel like they were in a safe place. And in order for it to feel safe, there has to be unconditional positive regard. If I feel like you're going to judge me, or the way you're looking at me is indicative of, oh, I don't approve of the way you're living your life, or the way you're talking about this, or, obviously your thinking is wrong. He didn't want to have that at all. So he wanted unconditional positive regard. And then he wanted you to practice that art of listening, which, to sum it up, I don't know, here I am talking a lot, talking about listening. To sum it up, you kind of reflect back what you think you heard, allowing the person to then correct. So I hear you saying that you really want to go get pizza, but you're feeling conflicted, whatever it might be.
Right.
And that gives a person a chance to say like, oh, well, what I really meant was this, but, obviously that didn't come across, so now we can communicate better. And then questions. What do you mean by you really want to go get a pizza? Like, do you simply mean that you're hungry? Is it because we've always had good talks when we went to get pizza and you feel nostalgic about that? What's the deeper meaning behind that? So he was really big on this art of listening and this unconditional positive regard. But Deb, it's not easy. Human nature often is to do things fast, to not really care what somebody else thinks, feels, or says, and just wait for your chance to talk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Adam, in your experience with working with people, what would you say the percentage is of people who, because I find it happens actually more now than it has ever occurred, because of the fact that we are so fast with our phones. Everything is super fast with reaction. that people are preparing a response, well before they even heard the other person finish one sentence, let alone a full thought.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, what's the percentage? I mean, I would say it's as high. I mean, let me put it out there first. I would say it's as high as 80 or 90% that people are preparing their response and not really listening to the person, or they're predicting what the person is going to say.
Yeah, and I think some of that comes from, there's been a shift in the way humans communicate with the whole texting thing, and not judging it. It is what it is, and we've seen other shifts, in the way we live. Like the computers brought a whole other level of things, then printing press brought a whole other level of things. So I'm not judging it and saying it's wrong, but what Carl Rogers was talking about with the art of listening was not only the words or reading the text and trying to figure out what the person is really saying when they text you. He was assuming that you're actually face to face with a human being. And you're not only hearing the words that you're saying, but the tone of the voice, the facial expressions, just the whole richness of an actual human interaction. And I think in his generation, sure, some people are anxious and they have trouble being with people, but for the most part, people were socialized a lot more. They didn't grow up on a screen. They grew up playing with other kids and running around and learning how to interact socially with other human beings. And so there was a different kind of skill set. And honestly, I suspect, I hear these things on like NPR and, kind of public radio kind of stuff about this chronic, suicidality and depression among young people. And I can't help but wonder if part of it is the loneliness of the lack of genuine, human interaction.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a whole nother next right thing, Adam.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's very interesting. But Adam, I know we have a little bit on this side of the break, and then when we come back for the final segment, obviously we're going to be talking about the next right steps, right? The next right thing to do in this area of really perfecting and polishing the art of listening. But let me ask you this question. Do you feel that when people are not being heard, when they know that for sure, like they're working with somebody and that person is truly not listening to them, they're living with somebody as a spouse and that person is really rejecting what they have to say, and they're so busy looking at the TV set or the screen or something of that nature, or their phone. And you talked about what it can do to the, self-esteem, what it does to the person, how it chips away at them and things of that nature. But my question is, what does it do to their spiritual life? Because when you're, think about this for a moment. One of the things, the way we understand God, right? The way we relate to God is also the way in various aspects we relate to each other. That's how we learn. The what we put out there, our response, building trust, communication, love, respect, all the beautiful things we do with each other, we try to do with God, right? And so if we're not being heard, if it's chipping away at us, if it's making us feel like we're insignificant, we're not valued, what is that? How is that also hurting our spiritual life?
Well, Jesus said, love one another, as I have loved you. He didn't say, go reflect on how I loved you and be isolated. Yes, some people are called to live life as a hermit or a hermitess for a period of time in their life, but, that's a rare vocation. He, in general, calls us to love one another, be charitable, be kind, be merciful, be understanding. And part of that caring is listening. So if Jesus called us to emulate him with each other, to be his hands in the world, so to speak, while he's at the right hand of the Father in heaven until he returns, to be his eyes, to be his voice, to try to share Jesus with other people, it seems obvious to me that when we don't do that, we're harming our spiritual life. Because if if he said this is his commandment, well, first off, we're kind of breaking his commandment if we kind of just selfishly isolate and never try to genuinely love one another. It's, and my bishop he brings us up in a beautiful way. There's a difference between giving somebody who's down on their luck $5 and taking a minute to talk with them about their humanity and where they're at and look them in the eye and give them $5. Like, we can do a superficial, like, okay, I checked the box, but I don't have to actually engage, versus a genuine loving engagement, at least a little bit. Not saying, you have to turn your life over for every single person you encounter, but at least have a moment of connection.
Interesting. I want to talk more about this, Adam, but what you're sharing today, I think, can be, I think a lot of us have to absorb it and figure out in our own lives when we're interacting with our family, our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers. We have to really do an examination of how we show up, right? How we show up in this relationship, because I loved what you had to say, and we use it quite frequently in coaching, where you'll ask those clarifying questions. You'll ask, I believe this is what I heard from you, Adam, and you repeat it back, and then you get confirmation from that person, and then you move on with the conversation. The interesting thing about this, Adam, it only takes a few seconds. But for most people, it feels like an eternity. In life coaching, we deal with this a lot. People will say, well, I don't have the time. Just say what, say what you have to say. Get it. You don't have to write a whole book. Just tell me what you want. I mean, and it's so interesting. It's the same example of a person that races on the street to get ahead of everybody, and then you pull up to the stoplight and they're beside you. They didn't get very far. Right? It's the same attitude, like, I got to get ahead, I got to keep going, I got to go faster, and yet you're still at the stoplight together, and you're like, wow, where did that get you? That almost got you a ticket by the police officer. So how did that work out for you? But it's the same thing in relationships. We rush through relationships thinking that we are saving time by rushing it. And in essence, it only takes a couple more seconds, literally seconds, Adam, to increase the soul-to-soul encounter, which could be very meaningful for both parties or for all parties concerned. So how do we get that communicated to everybody? And I'm the first one, Listen, I'm from Jersey, and we do everything very fast. Okay, so I had to learn when I moved to Arizona to slow down. Arizonans, we kind of roll with it. You got to go slowly. You got to pace yourself because you're living in that 110-degree dry heat, right? So you go slowly. But I had to learn that, Adam. And what can we say to the fine listeners of Morning Joy, and including ourselves? What do we say about, practicing this in a way that's going to be fruitful for our relationships?
Well, if you let me put on my, psychology hat for
Please.
A moment. And, people that are wondering, I have a master's in adult clinical psych, ABD for the dissertation, but a number of years in forensic and community psychology, psychological services. Have to be careful, to be clear. Now, the interesting thing about what you're talking about is, yes, we do want to rush through and have superficial interactions so that we can be efficient. But the deeper reason we do that, and this will sound strange, but it is terrifying to have genuine connection with other people. We are inherently scared of somebody actually sharing who they are, and we're inherently scared of being seen, and somebody really attending and paying attention, and maybe seeing part of who we are. Because all this is about vulnerability. If I'm genuine and vulnerable to somebody and sharing openly, that's a risk, right? The person could be mean. The person could take advantage of that. The person could mock me. They could lash out. I could get hurt because, I took that risk. So number one, it's scary. So we want to avoid any deep interactions with other people. And then number two is, many of us, and this is part of what group therapy is for, many of us never learned how to have genuine interactions, how to genuinely listen, how to communicate well. And I suspect that the people coming up that grew up on a screen are struggling even more with this because they didn't have as much socialization as we did. You know, the internet was bulletin boards when I was 13, and they were primitive, and they were like basically just text, you know, like sticking things on a bulletin board, leave a message up there kind of thing. So I grew up being socialized and running around and doing things with actual human beings. I think part of the problem is we no longer know how to do these things. We don't learn them as children. And they're still inherently scary because being vulnerable is scary. Somebody actually listening and attending to you can be scary. Why? Two things. One, I don't know how to do that. Most of us don't know how to do that kind of interaction. But secondly, this goes deep, but it touches on what Carl Rogers was about, why he was doing all this and the art of listening, is his goal was that your ideal self would line up with your real self. To him, that was the goal of therapy. Mm-hmm. So I have an ideal self that I imagine I'm supposed to be for the world, that other people want me to be, and I'm going to, you know, pretend to be what other people want. And then I've got my real self in my heart where I know what I'm about. I know what I genuinely like to do and spend my time on. I know that the people that I genuinely want to be around, if I have a calling in my life from God, I know what I'm supposed to be doing. But if my ideal self is pointing in a different direction than my internal compass, that's when mental illness happens from Carl Rogers' perspective. And so what I'm getting at is, the other reason it's scary to have genuine interactions is if I feel like my life is hollow or there's lots of internal conflict because I'm not doing what my real self is, that's going to be highlighted if somebody reflects that back to me, if we have genuine interaction. And so all of this basically touches on, and there's many other examples, it's tough to be human. It's a challenge to interact with other people. It's a challenge to be real with other people. It's a challenge to let them be real with you and still sit with them and be with them and not just judge them and dismiss them. All of this is work. It's actually work. It's emotional work. It might take seconds, as you say, it's true. Take a couple seconds to do, but emotionally, it takes quite a bit of energy and work to do it.
Wow. Okay, as you were speaking, Adam, I had just a huge light bulb moment. I mean, that was just brilliant what you shared with all of us. So let me make sure I understand it correctly. When you're in a conversation with somebody, your spouse, a loved one, a friend, a coworker, a fellow parishioner, a neighbor, and they dismiss you or they kind of trample over you and have a response before you ever get to finish a sentence. Maybe it's time we think about it, right? And say, this person is struggling with an insecurity or a character flaw because they don't want to fully soul to soul revealing, vulnerable connection interact. So it's not about them looking down on you, being condescending or anything like that. It's really their own inadequacy. Did I hear that correctly?
I wouldn't say inadequacy. I would say their own fear.
Their own fear. Okay. Mm-hmm. Wow. That was powerful. That's huge. I hope everybody picked up on that because I know there are a lot of people, especially in this day and age, that do exactly that. They'll be very dismissive. They'll be quick to cut you in the middle of a sentence. And so it's their own fear. Now, what do we do real quickly in the last minute? What do we do about these people's fears?
Well, there's no simple answer. But what you can do is be a little bit genuine and a little bit vulnerable. And that instinctively causes other people to share a little bit themselves too. So if you want to get the ball rolling, don't jump in the deep end of the pool, but be a tiny bit vulnerable, share a little bit of your real self, your real thoughts and feelings, and the other person will intuitively do the same thing back because that's how we're wired as human beings. Mm-hmm. And that will help. Again, don't go too far too fast, but just share a little and then practice that between you and that person.
Okay, that is amazing.
Thank you for listening to The Next Right Thing with angel specialist Debbie Georgianni and religious demonologist Adam Blai. Debbie and Adam are daily contributors to the live radio program Morning Joy, hosted by Keith Downey every weekday on the Guadalupe Radio Network. For more authentic Catholic content, go to grnonline.com/joy.